I agree with Ben Shapiro on many things. Often, when I don't, I find his viewpoint backed up sufficiently to at least acknowledging he's arguing from a point of strength. In terms of his critique on Tucker Carlson and the recent GOP bloodbath forum, I have nits to pick at the very least. I thought his critique was pretty weak, uncharacteristically weak, and really paints him in a bad light. He was oddly parroting a lot of talking points coming out of the New Republic. Now, I like Tucker Carlson in that he gives voice to a lot of people in America that would otherwise have no voice. Tucker's flaws come from voicing populist concerns. Populism isn't always rational, and often it's a problem waiting for an expert decision maker to solve. Uh, I'm going to basically pull some stuff from an article that should be in the comment, or excuse me, in the below the video there in the comments area. Uh, I'm going to use a different voice so you know it's Ben's words. And unfortunately, it's going to sound a little bit like him because it's really hard not to do that. I'm not intending to make fun of him, although it is mocking in a way. It's a loving parody, shall we say, rather than attempting to make fun of him. So please don't take it in a manner where I'm trying to make fun of him. He does have a particularly unique way of talking. All right. So Ben critiques Tucker thusly. This weekend, Tucker Carlson interviewed a bevy of Republican presidential candidates in Iowa, despite the fact that the polls show that nearly zero Americans consider the war in Ukraine to be a top voting priority. So I would call that a little hyperbolic. 0% consider this a top priority? The Redfield and Wilton Strategies poll also found that American voters had mixed views on support of Ukraine, which is continuing to fight Russia. When asked if the defense of Ukraine is in the U.S. national interest, 18% strongly agreed, 29% agreed, a further 11% disagreed, 8% strongly agreed, and 24% said they neither agreed nor disagreed. 10% answered, don't know. When it came to U.S. support for Ukraine, 28% the U.S. had provided too much, 22% said it was too little, 29% said the support was the right amount, and 20% didn't know. Translation, it's an issue. It sounds like a lot of people are heavily conflicted on it. The fact that people are this conflicted on a topic that gets non-stop amplification from legacy media sounds like an issue that a populist should address. If people aren't almost 90% convinced that this is a great idea, it shows a lot of disarray when essentially the other side of the argument is virtually non existent. Tucker made the essentially an assertion that money spent on war material in a foreign war is money that's not spent here. Tucker made a point that our cities are in a state of collapse. Ben says to this, the true concern is the absolute specious link between hawkish foreign policy and apathy about domestic concerns. Ukraine has become a litmus test, not because many Americans care about it as a top issue. It has become a top issue because so many commentators and politicians now make it the argument that if you wish to spend a dollar in Ukraine to fend off Russian predation, you must be unconcerned about the suffering of American citizens here at home. So Ben is drawing some erroneous conclusions here. If he is saying if he's saying if Americans are unconcerned about something, that it shouldn't be a concern of pundits. If Americans are unable to make the connections between worsening problems here and spending on Ukraine, isn't it not the job of pundits to make a case for it? Ben says additionally, first off, The basic notion that pouring government money into inner cities somehow cures them of all their problems is belied by 60 years of just trying the strategy. To massive failure in most cases, we better off not spending government dollars on boondoggle programs, no matter where else we spend the money. I'm not really sure that anyone suggested that spending on social programs for big cities was the alternative to spending dollars on Ukraine. Surely Ben realizes that spending on war material is probably the least effective manner of bringing vitality to an economy. One wants to have war material on hand for a war, but this is not only our current actions are not only economically reckless, it's bad for our stockpile. At least with wasteful social programs, all the graft and corruption remains domestic. So then Ben says, there's an argument that isolationist foreign policy somehow results in greater American prosperity, that American citizens would be better off if we simply allowed the Russians to march into Kiev. This argument is disconnected from reality. It has no logical limits. Why not let China take Taiwan or Russia take Poland? What's the limiting principle? Well, there's several limiting factors. They're pretty obvious. One, we have treaty obligations to Poland. We have some nebulous obligations to Taiwan that have been stated, and we have literally none with Ukraine. Another interesting and good limiting factor would be don't cause a nuclear war over something that's not a U.S. interest. Ukraine's top export appears to have been graft and kickback money to Western politicians. It makes nothing we need. It has no resources that we need. People who use the term isolationist consider it the worst insult ever, because it's the last thing they would ever want to be accused of. When you're not in favor of America everywhere all at once, it doesn't have much of a sting. The words that one thinks are pejorative often speak volumes about the ones using it. Ukraine has no value to the U.S. Thinking that it's a bad idea to poke a stick at a nuclear power does not make someone an isolationist. Ben says additionally, the Ukraine war has disrupted the supply lines and resources ranging from platinum to titanium to grain and oil. Well, and if the war were over, those disruptions would be over. Ben also says, hawkishness is not allied to domestic poverty. In fact, hawkishness in the aftermath of World War II helped protect the safety of the oceans and skies, thus leading to the greatest outpouring of prosperity in history. Mr. Shapiro needs to reread The Broken Window. He sees aircraft carriers, bombers, and tanks keeping the trade goods flowing to and fro. What is unseen is how much trade would have occurred with less of them, or how many goods would have been produced in the U.S. if the worldwide footprint of the U.S. military and government had been just a little less. The U.S. needs a robust defense, but every penny spent needs to be questioned and justified, because every penny spent on war material takes from domestic prosperity. Mr. Shapiro then said, but regardless of what you think of America's support for Ukraine, it is dishonest to suggest that those who seek to fund Ukraine are universally apathetic about their fellow Americans. More Russia sounds every bit as lame coming from the left as it does from the right. Tucker merely demanded that Pence justify a huge expense America is incurring. It's a fair thing to do. Tucker used rhetoric to drive his point home. Instead of saying dollar amounts, he picked a visual most people can imagine. Pence was not asked to justify every defense dollar or every American soldier deployed around the world. He was only asked why Ukraine needed more than it was getting. And he failed to do so. Not only did he merely fail to do so, he self-immolated on stage. And in my opinion, good. That's absolute riddance to another neocon warmongering piece of trash. So in the comments section below, what do you think? Do you think Tucker's line of questioning was off base? Do you think it's a good thing for Tucker to use this line of questioning on the various candidates vying for presidential office? Be interested in hearing your comments below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a usual subscriber, please consider looking over my other titles of videos. I'm sure you'll see that I do a wide variety of things, possibly something you might like. Consider subscribing, and if you know somebody who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.